Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari's address to world leaders at the 76th United Nations General Assembly. He expressed satisfaction with the concerted global response to COVID-19. Buhari noted that the solidarity and drive to contain the first truly global health emergency speaks to how the world can work together to achieve a common goal. He also canvassed debt forgiveness for developing and poor countries.
Nigeria has made strenuous efforts to contain the virus and hold its deadly onslaught on our people. Our efforts have been rewarded with moderate success. At the outset, we recognize detection and contact tracing to be important tools in combating the virus. In this connection, from a mere 4 laboratories with testing and detection capacities, we ramped up the facilities to over 140 centers today. I would like to reiterate my call for a fairer and more equitable distribution of vaccines in all countries so that together we can fight and contain the pandemic. The rising wave of newer and more contagious strains makes this even more urgent. It is imperative to underscore that no one is safe until everyone is safe. The issue of debt, we have seen that developing countries have been faced with unsustainable debt burdens even before the pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has increased the risk of a new wave of deepening debt where vital public financial resources are allocated to external debt servicing and payments at the expense of domestic health and financing for critical development needs. Therefore, there is an urgent need to consider expansion and extension of debt service suspension initiative to include all developing, least developed countries and small island developing states facing fiscal and liquidity challenges. Mr. President, Nigeria reaffirms that international trade is an engine for development and sustained economic growth, as well as global eradication of poverty.
Well, the President of Nigeria, the President Muhammadu Buhari, the UN. Well, joining us now from our Lagos studio is Dr. Efem Ubi, Acting Director, Research and Studies at the Nigeria Institute of International Affairs. And of course, here in our studio, Dr. Abiodun Adeniyi, Arise News Analyst. Gentlemen, both of you are welcome to the program. Let's maybe leave out the issue of COVID now, which, I mean, is all over the place. But let's talk about the issue that the President touched on, and that is that of debt forgiveness. The President is calling for outright debt cancellation in some cases, expansion and extension of debt service suspension initiative. Let me start with you, Dr. Efem Ubi. What do you make of that call?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me in this program today. I think it is high time, the issue of debt review is taken into consideration. And for the mere fact that the President brought it at the United Nations, I think it is a welcome development. Since the advent of COVID-19, and prior to that, as alluded by the President, a lot of developing countries, Nigeria inclusive, have been getting have been borrowing money, in order to sustain the economy. And that has been the case across all the developing world. I think it is high time the international community, especially the Western countries, the advanced countries, the emerging economies, those of them that are actually doing well, come to look at the issues of debt, that is burdening developing country. I think it's a welcome idea. Debt review. It should be expanded, like he said, and extended. Then they should reschedule payments in such a way that it will not affect developing countries. There should also be debt forgiveness, which is key, and suspension of debt, interest rate, and all that. I think there are a whole lot of issues revolving around debt that needs to be remedied for the developing world.
Abiodun Adeniyi, is it debt forgiveness that African countries need, especially Nigeria, or is it to check the appetite for borrowing?
I think we need both, really, because our economies are weak, and sometimes the argument has been made. Our production capacity is also very weak, and of course we need to talk about development and what are the indices of development, the level of our infrastructure, level of our utilities. You need funds, you need resources to bring up, to bring about these items, which are indices of development. And of course, these are the things that you need to trigger economic growth, trigger multipliers, I beg your pardon, stimulate full employment, etc., etc. But when you don't have the resources, one source of revenue is debt. But it goes also beyond asking for debt forgiveness. We'll probably need some kind of review, some kind of reflection and reflections on how well we have used the resources that we have gathered so far, that we've been able to source from these multilateral, these strong economies in the first instance. It's not just enough for us to be asking for debt forgiveness. It's okay that the president has asked, but of course we also have to be introspective to look inwards. How well can we ramp up production, and borrow less, because of course we know the implications of continuous borrowing, for future generations, as the case could be.
Okay, so let's shift focus, gentlemen, to another key message of President Muhammadu Buhari to the world. He highlighted the challenges democracy is facing in West Africa, as well as the issue of good governance. He said the democratic gains of the last decade are gradually being eroded. Let's listen.
We must deal not only with the symptoms of conflict, but also the immediate causes that fuel conflicts in the first place. These include poor and undemocratic governance, human rights abuses, poverty, ignorance, injustice, and inequalities. There are no easy solutions to these conditions. They require long-term investments and more effective international cooperation. In this connection, my delegation underscores the importance of promoting peaceful, unfettered, and inclusive participation of states in global actions towards conflict prevention. This will facilitate the achievement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the African Union Agenda 2063. In West Africa especially, our democratic gains of the first decades are now being eroded. The recent trend of unconstitutional takeover of power, sometimes in reaction to unilateral changes of constitution by some leaders, must not be tolerated by the international community.
The studio is Dr. Efem Ubi, Acting Director of Research and Studies at the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs. And of course, we'll have Dr. Abiodun here in the studio. Let me come to you now, Dr. Abiodun. Let's talk about the place of governance, how it encourages some of these insecurity being witnessed in the Horn of Africa, with special reference to what happened recently in Guinea.
Yeah, the democracy is priceless. It's been established in the 24th century that is the best form of government, because it is very involving, it's inclusive as well, it's representational, and of course it's been seen as a system of government that is synonymous with civilization. So if we are in a globalized world, a world of global change, it's definitely inimical to global process and of course African progress, progress and development. If we still have nations, that are retrogressive, taking us back to military rule. That's the kind of rule that has become dated, really. And of course, the president deserves commendation for speaking to it. Nigeria is one of the most populous countries, if not the most populous in Africa. And of course, we stand the chance of becoming the bastion of democracy. For the president to speak to it, condemning what happened in Guinea recently, I think is a welcome development, and of course, calling the attention of the global community on the need for us to be an increased globalized advocacy, towards discouraging the continuation of the Guinean experiment, as the case could be, once more.
All right, gentlemen, we'll continue this discussion when we return from this short break. Do stay with us. All right, thanks so much for staying with us. You're still watching News Night. Our guest, Dr. Efem Ubi, is Acting Director Research, and Abiodun Adeniyi, Arise News Analyst. Let me ask you this question on the issue that President Buhari raised on military coups. The question is democracy losing its attraction in Africa? Is that what's happening? And how can Africa actually crack this old and now new code of recycling bad governance, which seems to be at the root of these military incursions?
Is it to me?
Yes.
Hello? Yeah. I must say that I've never been so happy and proud to be a Nigerian. Today, with regard to the speech made by our president at the United Nations, when it comes to military coups in Africa. And I think it is one problem that recently, Africa has been facing. Recently, you've seen coups in Mali, Guinea, Sudan, Chad, even Niger, and a host of other countries. Kind of retrogression back into the old days of military purchase. Now, one reason the president gave has to do with permanent president, sit-tight president, no term limits. I think this has been a major problem. Now, I was reading BBC News the other time, and they were saying that most of the reason given for military purchase in Africa is corruption, bad governance, economic reasons, poverty inclusive, and all that. I think it is high time Africans, leaders, begin to sit up and look at issues of governance, issues of leadership, look at issues of economic, ways of alleviating poverty. The masses should be taken into consideration with regards to social provisioning. I think these are most of the reasons that has been given. If you listen to all the coup speeches, even prior to the 21st century, all of them boil down to the same thing: corruption, bad governance, poverty, and all that. I think if that is a problem, I think that is where we have to look into. Right now, leaders should look inward. I think we should begin to build our economies. We should begin to set in place factors, indices that could build the economy, that could give room for economic growth and development. Now, it is always said that if there is no peace, there can't be development. And the reverse is the case. If there's no development, there can't be peace. And the whole continent, if care is not taken, will run into chaos. Because, you see, one coup in a country will give rise to another coup in another country. I think like as if everybody is trying to copy everybody, within the region and within the continent. I think these are things that we have to look into. And I'm happy that our president actually reiterated that fact that term limits should be adhered to. No president should be given room, to extend term limit to disrupt the constitution. I once wrote, in an article that is democracy failing in Africa or Africa failing under democracy? And I look at it from both ways. And I gave reasons why democracy is failing in Africa and why Africa is failing under democracy. Some of the reasons I gave were issues of ethnicity, weak economic base, and the revolt from the bottom. Look at permanent presidency and or sit-tight presidency, and a whole gamut of other reasons like corruption. I think these are things that we begin to look for remedy and solutions to. And unless we do that, I think such occurrences will keep rearing their ugly heads.
Let's take some other issues that the president discussed at the UN General Assembly. In his address to world leaders at the UN General Assembly, President Buhari said the Boko Haram terrorist group is fragmented and has been weakened. However, he said despite the efforts of the armed forces against the insurgents, they remain active and are preying on soft targets. He pointed out that uncontrolled weapons are having devastating humanitarian and socio-economic consequences.
Nigeria remains deeply concerned over the illicit trade, transfer, and circulation of small arms and light weapons. Their excessive accumulation and uncontrolled spread in many regions of the world are having devastating humanitarian and socio-economic consequences, especially on the continent of Africa. It is on this note that my delegation calls for the worldwide application of the Arms Trade Treaty to codify accountability in conventional arms trade, which is critical to the security of nations. This is in recognition of the need for a broad-based global partnership in the ongoing battle against transborder crimes, including terrorism and piracy.
All right, we still have with us from our Lagos studio, Dr. Efem Ubi, Acting Director, Research and Studies at the Nigeria Institute of International Affairs. And here in the studio, Dr. Abiodun Adeniyi, a Rise News analyst. Both of you gentlemen, let me start with you, Abiodun Adeniyi. The president's called for an arms trade treaty to codify accountability. But really, the question is this government doing enough to plug the loopholes, fix the borders, the porous borders, of course, where it really needs to start from? Is government doing enough to check, this proliferation of arms into Nigeria? 70% of arms in West Africa actually found in Nigeria. Abiodun Adeniyi.
Well, that's a yes, like a yes and no answer. We can say government still has a lot to do, and we can also say that we are aware they are making efforts. We've been told they are making efforts. And of course, we know that if those efforts are actually being successful, we will not continue to have the inflow of small and light weapons and the failure of government to interdict this inflow. So we just assume that it's a work in progress. And of course, if Nigeria alone can actually deal with it, the president will probably not be in the UN calling for increased multilateralism, increased cooperation for us to be able to deal with these increase in infiltration. But from our own point, we also have to be concerned about policing our borders. So much has been said about the fact that our borders are porous, the fact that we are placeless in terms of demarcation, in terms of national boundaries and all of that. Efforts have to be ramped up in those areas, so that we can deal with this influx of fighting personnel and ammunition, as the case could be. Then what about the Lake Chad region itself? Why is it that over the years we've not been able to deal with it? Why is it that our security agencies are still not able to move into that place and probably take charge of it? Yeah, we will not not blame them. We know they are doing their best. But of course, it's also okay, and that's why we're saying it's also okay for international support to come in at this stage, so that we can have much more synergy, much more cooperation, and collaboration, so that we can increase our own fighting forces and permanently deal with these insurgents. But having said that, we also have to look further inwards at poverty, look at the question of illiteracy, look at the question of overpopulation, rising unemployment, increasing our economy, so that people can be gainfully employed, because we know nihilism, sense of disbelief, come from long years of frustration, long years of hopelessness, and there's no human being that want to live a hopeless life, a life of where there's literally no tomorrow. And in that kind of circumstance, if you give that person arms and ammunition, you want to take advantage of it and oppress the other person. So we have to look at all these things collectively, and that's why it was okay for the president to call for increased multilateralism. But my overarching fear again is the question of the United Nations itself. What enforcement power does he have in the wake of, in the face of stronger nations, stronger overbearing nations? Perhaps we're making this kind of regular call on the UN stage. We shouldn't also forget the potency of some nations, that can control literally the United Nations, as the case could be, and probably focus on them as well, in terms of getting support, the way we've been doing over the years. And I have in mind the Anglo-Saxon nations, United States of America, Britain, as the case could be. So our attention should also be on this nation, irrespective of the usefulness of presenting our problem, on the world stage, on the platform of the United Nations.
All right, Dr. Ubi, he's raised some issues there. Let's look at policies and initiatives to address the issue of small arms and light weapons, both by the international community and the regional blocs. What's missing?
Well, I think the international community is doing enough, considerable well, in fighting illicit flow of small arms and light weapons. But as a matter of fact, I want to bring to the fore that, is it one scourge that is going to be very difficult for humankind to eliminate is terrorism. And no one nation can fight that. And that is why we are calling for a concerted effort. And that's why the president said we need that multilateral effort to combat this scourge, terrorism, insurgency, militancy. It's everywhere, especially in Africa. The hotspot this time around is West Africa and the Sahel region as a whole. I think the policies put in place, although they are working, but we need to do more. We need a lot of countries to come together to fight this scourge. If not, we'll continue to go back. Like you said, we've tried enough. We've been able to, weaken Boko Haram. Some of them are surrendering now, but we also need enough. We need synergies among the security forces, inclusive of the paramilitary forces, the immigration, the customs, the army, navy, air force. Everybody should come. There should be synergy. And unless we do that, it's not something that we can fight alone. It's not something that the army can fight alone, not something the navy can fight alone. Everybody must come together. Then policies should be put in place. More critically, whatever policy is going to be put in place should take into consideration economic factors. Yes, a lot of much recent arguments are saying that it's not really most of the crisis or conflict around the region or in Africa is not because of economic reasons. But I think, yes, while it is it is laced with a complex mix of interests, those factors like economics, poverty, he talked about education, literacy or illiteracy and all that. I think that should be taken into consideration. And unless we begin to do that, we should have to, what we have to do right now is build productive infrastructures, infrastructures that we need that will grow the economy. Those kind of infrastructure could give room for self-employment and a host of other factors that could enliven the society. I think these are issues that should be taken into consideration. Much more importantly, I think, especially with regards to the Sahel and the ECOWAS region or West Africa, I think all the countries within this region should come together, and we should also tap knowledge sharing, intelligence gathering, and all that should be part and parcel of it. When I mean knowledge gathering, let's look at what is happening in East Africa. How are they able to combat? Let's look at what is happening in West Africa. How are they combating? I think there should be that synergy and learn from each other, lessons from each other. Then the international community as a whole, the United Nations should come, and the superpowers too, we need them. They have high tech, and we need this high tech in fighting terrorism, in fighting insecurity across the continent, and precisely West Africa, and in specific, the Sahel region, where we are bordered with these pristine problems.
Thank you so much. Of course, the president did talk about the root causes of conflicts and all of that. Gentlemen, Dr. Efem Ubi, Acting Director Research and Studies, Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, Abiodun Adeniyi, Arise News Analyst, thank you so much for joining us on Newsnight.